Today's lesson is about being able to identify the independent variable and dependent variable in various representational modes, words, symbols, and/or graphs. It is Common Core 9 through 12 Standard A.CED.1. So there's two definitions that you need to know in order to work this lesson: the independent variable and the dependent variable. Well, let's look at independent first. What is it? Well, it is a variable in an equation that may have its value freely chosen without considering values of any other variable. A dependent variable is a variable that depends on one or more other variables. So what does all this mean? Well, let's talk about something like this. Let's go on a trip, perhaps, okay? So to go on this trip, you're going to have to drive so many miles. Unfortunately, your car, it's going to use gas. You've got to pay for that gas, all that kind of stuff. Well, in that scenario that I just described, what is independent? What do you have the freedom to choose? And that is the number of miles that you drive. How far are you going to go? Where are you going to go? You have that choice. Now, there's some things that happen because of the choice that you made, the dependent variable. And in this case, if you go on a trip, you drive so many miles, well, you're going to have to buy gas. So the amount of money that you're going to wind up spending on the gas, that is your dependent variable. So let's look at some examples and let's see, can we identify an independent variable and a dependent variable? Let's look at this example. Jordan squeezes 6 oranges to get 2.5 cups of orange juice. Identify the independent variable and the dependent variable. Well, let's do independent first. That's the one that you have control over, that you choose. So do we get to choose how many oranges we squeeze or how many cups of orange juice that we get? Well, in this case, the independent variable is the oranges that you squeeze. Now, depending on the number of oranges that you squeeze is how much orange juice you get. So the dependent variable is the cups of orange juice. So now let's look at a graph of the oranges and the cups of orange juice, because I know this is just one little point, but eventually we'd like to go into equations and solve equations and know what the independent and dependent variable are. So let's just practice this. So if we do this, we know when we graph something, it's got an x value and a y value. Now, x is usually the independent variable and y is usually the dependent variable. So what's going on with this one? Well, like we said just a moment ago, the independent variable, well, that was the number of oranges. And how many oranges did we have? Well, we've got 6 of them. So oranges is our independent variable and it's 6. So that's an x value, so we've got to label the x-axis our oranges. And on this one, we've got to go all the way up to 6. So on this scale for this graph that we have, we're just going to go by ones and we'll go 1 all the way to 7 just because that fits. Okay, so there is our x-axis. Now our y-axis, our dependent variable. Well, that was the cups of orange juice. And in this case, we had 2.5 cups of orange juice. Now that 2.5, that means we want to be able to go by halves. So those lines that are going horizontal, we want those to go by halves. Well, if we do that, our y-axis is going to be the cups of orange juice. And if every other one is 1, that means we can go all the way up to 4. Hopefully that makes sense and you understand what I'm saying. So now we've just got a point to plot, the 6 and the 2.5. So if you go to the right 6 and then go up 2.5, you plot that point, and that is our point of our values for this question. Remember, the independent variable is graphed on the horizontal axis and the dependent variable is graphed on the vertical axis. So let's look at this example. Jessica has a summer job that pays $6.50 per hour. Her total pay for one day is $32.50. Identify the independent and dependent variables, then graph. So we're going to identify our values and then we're going to graph that point. Well, how do we do that? Well, our x and our y value, what do we have control over? In this case, we have control over the number of hours that we work. And you're going, it's not even mentioned up there. Well, you're right. It is not directly mentioned up there. The only things mentioned is her total pay that she gets and how much she makes per hour. But she does not have control over how much she makes per hour. Her boss decides how much she makes per hour. What she does have control over is the number of hours that she works. So hours has got to be our independent variable. So our dependent variable, what depends on the number of hours that she works? Well, the number of hours that she works, and we'll just go from 1 to 7 whenever we graph this right now. And our dependent would be her total pay. So her total pay, that's going to be our Y values, and we got to go all the way up to that 3250. So let's go by tens, graph something like this. So we'll adjust it if we need to here in a little bit, but hopefully this will work. Well, how do we get the number of hours that she actually worked for that 3250 for her paycheck? Well, what we do is take the 3250, divide by how much she makes per hour, which is 650, and that will tell us the number of hours that she works. So if you solve this, you're going to get 5 hours. So that 5 is our value of X, and the 3250 is our value of Y. So now we can plot this point. If you plot 5, 3250, it'll be about right there on the graph the way we have it labeled. So you might be still going, why are we just graphing this one point? Well, eventually we're going to build up to scatter plots. We'll have to identify the independent variable, the dependent variable, and graph a whole bunch of individual points and then do best fit lines and all that. So we're just trying to practice those skills now while it's nice and simple, only one point, so we can build up and work those more difficult problems. Let's look at another example. So here's our third example. One day I asked the vet how old my dog was in human years. He said that 1 dog year was equal to about 10 human years. It can be written as an equation as follows: d of x equals 10x. Identify the independent and the dependent variables. Notice this time we're not going to graph anything. All we're going to do is what's independent, what do I have control over, and what depends on it. So for a dog, what is the independent variable? Well, the independent variable on this one is the dog years, how old the dog is. He's going to age, okay? So that is the independent variable. Now, depending on how old he is in dog years, the dependent variable is the human years, that d of x. So this is how you identify independent variables and dependent variables for a given situation.